Civil defense crew members and paramedics are still unable to reach the bombed sites in the eastern part of Gaza City, particularly the area that was relentlessly bombed by the Israeli military. As many as 20 bombs were dropped on residential clusters and public facilities in the northern eastern part of the Gaza Strip. Many of the reports of people who were caught under the heavy bombardment are still trapped under the rubble of the bombed homes. Many of the people who managed to escape the area are pushed into further displacement in the western part of Gaza City. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situations are still quite difficult and moving from bad to worse and from worse into dire right now, with the decision of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, after taking over the humanitarian aid delivery for the past months or so, pushing aside all the other organizations, including UNRWA, and running a monopoly over the humanitarian aid delivery. It suspended its operations in its major hubs in the southern and the central part of the Strip, leaving thousands of people without a proper and safe access into humanitarian aid. Already the GHF did not provide the minimum level of protection, let alone the minimum level of safety for the traumatized, displaced, hungry civilian population waiting and seeking food parcels and sack of flowers in these distribution centers, let alone the fact that whatever is delivered to these people is not sufficient enough. So not only it's insufficient, but also in terms of its nutritious value, it lacks in nutritious elements of these food parcels that are given to people. Meanwhile, the death toll from just these areas is as many as 700 people have been killed near distribution centers managed and operated by the distribution centers managed and operated by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, making it very difficult for people who are usually making the dangerous trip from the northern part of the Strip into these distribution centers, taking the risk and risking their lives and safety in order to go back to their families in displacement sites with at least a food parcel or a bag of flour. Hani, Mahmoud, Al Jazeera from Gaza City, Palestine.
We'll now speak to Glenn Carle, who's a U.S. national security and foreign policy specialist and also a former deputy national intelligence officer. You're joining us from Boston this hour. Thanks once again for your time. So starving Palestinians and pushing them to the south of Gaza, to what extent is this pre-planned by Israel with the intention of leading to forced transfers?
Well, I think probably it's both planned and unplanned, by which I mean we all tend, when watching governments act, to assume that they have a grand strategy and are acting coherently. And in my experience, and my experience is typical, that's almost never the case. So I think what is likely to be happening is that part of the Israeli government, the dominating right-wing faction on whom Netanyahu depends for continued staying in power, would like to occupy and seize Gaza as part of Greater Israel. Other parts of the government don't. So you have this ad hoc, somewhat disjointed process which slowly grinds down and amounts to step-by-step creating worse conditions for the Palestinians. In fact, I think that's probably what's happening.
But we heard this from the Israeli defense minister, didn't we? I mean, Israel Katz put forward a proposal which includes placing Palestinians in a confined area, so effectively what's known as a concentration camp with no freedom of movement once they're inside. How likely is this to happen, and how will Israel enforce this?
Well, how they would enforce it is they have the army, who, if you have the means of exercising force and others do not, then you can enforce it. People are largely helpless, and once people are shepherded, then it becomes a reality. So I think it's partly planned and partly this unthinking, organic, creating realities day to day that hem the Gazans ever more tightly.
You know, since the beginning of the war, Mr. Carle, though, we heard over and over from a number of Israeli officials that they wanted Palestinians out. They wanted them to go to Egypt. So is the ultimate aim here to push Palestinians into Egypt?
Well, as I say, I think for the far right parties, I think the Minister of Defense and Security are from those parts of the Israeli political spectrum. That may well be the desire, if not the explicit objective. For the government as a whole, I think that Netanyahu is sort of going along with it. I think Donald Trump may capture the dynamic more or less well, which is that he probably thinks, and I'm putting thoughts somewhat into his head or his mouth by assessing here, that, well, it's terrible there. They would be better someplace else. They have no future. And besides, I'm a friend of Israel's, and that would be better for Israel. So let's just see if we can push things along.
What could be the regional implications should that happen? And how do you think regional countries like Egypt, like even Jordan, would deal with this? And could it lead to instability?
Well, it would be it would be a terrible crisis for all concerned, for Egypt, for the Palestinians, of course, for Libya, if that were involved too. Egypt and other Muslim states have been quite clear for 60 years that they support the Palestinians but want to have nothing to do with them on their own territories, in part boxing them in as a result into Gaza. So the consequences would be politically tremendous. How it would affect the political stability and the economic stability and growth of the region is to be determined, but it would be a huge strain. And that gets to the ultimate point, I think, of all of what's happened in the last several years, and frankly for the last 60, which is that the war has given certainly Israel greater security for a medium-term period, but it has not addressed any of the structural problem, which is that Palestine doesn't have a state, that Hamas is existentially seeking to destroy Israel without the capability of doing so, and that the fundamental problem of the Palestinians and the Israelis is not addressed. So this would just push down the road, as has always been the case, the problem, and things would get worse because there's less and less land for the Palestinians to conceivably have as a second state, and their suffering is getting worse.
I mean, when you say things could get worse, how much worse? How do you see this playing out?
Well, a war, a conventional war is really not conceivable now. We've seen Israel is so dominant, and no other power has the interest or the means to do that. The terrorist groups or terrorism has been diminished, the threat thereof, because Hezbollah is weaker, Hamas is weaker. The Shia groups supported by Iran and Iraq are weaker, and so on. But the fundamental grievances that drive their existence are unchanged. And so you will find this will simmer, anger will continue to fester, and at some point, the only way that this aggrieved group, party, people can strike out probably will be by terrorism again down the road, since conventional actions are not really.
Glenn Carle, you're speaking to us from Boston this hour. You're a U.S. national security and foreign policy specialist. Thanks for your time.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.